Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So what you see there first, I want to introduce you to this. It's called Align to Soul. Who are you? And this is a new organization that we've created in the States. And it will be a portal, a web portal, and also the logo for the work that we're doing there. And the basis of that is to present the Quran as a living code of guidance that will be able to communicate to the modern being, modern consciousness, modern mind, that the teachings of the Quran in a transformative and directly useful way. We've just begun with this project, and it will be some time before our website is up, but when it is, inshallah, I'll inform everyone about it. And I'll be really grateful also for any help once you see the theme and the charter up for your participation, inshallah. I wanted to also, before I begin this presentation, to just contextualize a little bit about stories, and also to bring in a comment, a point that Sheikh Fadlallah made about how we're living in the best time. And one of the elements of living in that this is the best time is that we have a evolvement of scientific knowledge, of especially astrophysical knowledge, where we can see pictures of the universe telling us a story. We see the galaxies and the superstructures and the vastness of that. That vastness, that reflection of the vastness of the known and outer, so to speak, universe, it expands each one of us internally. You know, there's an old story when Galileo first invented the telescope. He asked people to come around and look at it, and they were astonished, and they said, "You've captured all the stars inside the telescope." He said, "No, they're out there," and they said, "No, they're in there." They were both right. You know, what you see and experience in your consciousness, in the so-called outward, is an element and a reflection and a facet of some part of you. So in this day and age, when we have the capacity to vision out, to see on the horizon of the plane of existence, that evokes a spaciousness and an expansion of consciousness within you. It can. So, as far as stories are concerned, there's really ultimately, when you look at the vastness and the pattern, the matrix that is repeated everywhere, both outwardly in the celestial realm and inwardly in just your atomic structure, your molecular, atomic, subatomic, you see that it's all connected. And in this day and age, Alia Khanum mentioned about consciousness, that everyone now is the holy grail is, what is consciousness? Scientific studies are done on consciousness. Psychologists are talking about consciousness. Biologists are talking about consciousness. It is now what is desired, as to what is this? Who are we? And that's why I put the theme there, who are you? Because that ultimately is the ultimate question to be answered, to be realized, to be understood. So all the things that we experience in life, stories, each one of us is a story. The Quran is a story. Munira Khanum gave this beautiful talk. It's a story. We love stories. We're hot-wired, in a way, to be inclined towards stories. I recently looked at a study done by neurologists where they track the activity of the brain and the lower gut in response to stories. And they found that oxytocin, cortisol, serotonin, all these are released in the brain and in the and many things in the hormonal system when someone is told a story. Your whole being is responding to a story. This is something really important to reflect on. We are designed to hear this story, but what is the story that we are listening to? What is the narrative that is stealing, you may say, our consciousness, our awareness, our attention, diverting us from the universal story, Allah's story, Allah's language? This entire creation is Allah's speech. But when we are in our relative focus, when we are bounding our awareness into just our daily things that we do, I'm this, I don't feel good today, she did it, like Shaykh Fadl always lays out this very important sort of ground that we sink into. We need to turn away from that. Realize that that is the very thing that is distracting us from what the true one narrative is. There's only one narrative. The rest of it is secondary. It's all relative. But it's necessary because we need to have in a way, the relative experience, the disappointment in the issues of life, so that we look for what is lasting. We want to have money and power, but ultimately, kullu man alayha fan. Everything is vanishing. Ultimately, we will seek that which is ever consistent. That's the nature of this issue. So, coming to stories, we're all listening to stories, and all of us have a story. In fact, it's amazing. All of us have a story because you echo the unique one. That's why you consider yourself unique, because you are actually an echo of the unique. It's a proof. You are a living proof in a transcendent way of the one and only story, and the one and only Wahid wal Ahad. That's the thing. Now, I have some stories. I've had some extraordinary, I would say, experiences. But those experiences were perfectly designed for me, so that the territory of my being can evolve and realize what was needed at that time for me to get out of my own personal narrative. And inshallah, if these stories benefit anyone else, it's because it's the same, you're the same. We're all the same. We're all needing to hear something that transcends our little narrative and takes us to a higher level of consciousness. So, this PowerPoint was not necessarily prepared for this moment, so there may be a few pictures that we'll just go through quickly. So let's start with the first one. Sheikh Fadlallah actually had asked me to tell the story about Sheikh Mahbub Shah in Al-Jalani in Pakistan, and I'll get to that. But I just want to just show you some beautiful faces. Faces of light and people of enlightenment and inspiration. Sheikh Suleiman Deda, I met him when I was 17 years old. He was in a crowd of people with Rashad Fields and Helminski, Kabir Helminski. And I didn't know any of them and knew nothing about Sufism or anything. But when he walked by me as he was leaving, I didn't have a beard. And so he turned to everyone and said, "I'll remember all the men here with beards." And then he looked at me. And I said, "Okay." That's when I grew my first beard. So, and I really couldn't know why, but I really wanted this person's attention. Okay, go to the next one. This is Murshid Hassan al-Mu'mini. He played a huge role, I'm going to go through this quickly, in California. There were two very powerful or strong Sufi groups, the Sufi Order of the West and the Sufi Islami Ruhaniya Society, one by Inayat Khan and the other by Murshid Hassan, Sufi Sam. When he came, he kind of turned the whole thing upside down. He was buried he lived in his grave in Nablus, in the West Bank, and he stayed there for 7 years. People would feed him, and one day when someone came from the Sufi Islami Ruhaniya Society, he came out because he'd never seen sort of white American Muslims before, you know. So he came out of his grave, and for weeks all he could say was the Asma Jalal. He could only say Allah. He told me this himself. And finally he was able to speak to others. And so he was, and there's more about him, but we'll get to that another time. Go. Oh, wait. So here I have this picture, and there's a reason. You see the name of Allah back there? So do you remember the other night we talked about Sayyid Jamarani? Well, that's the calligraphy that he gave me when I was 21 years old. And that's the calligraphy, as I told you that night, that when the fuqara of Sheikh Abdul Qadir were walking by my restaurant, they came in and said, "Why do you have the name of Allah?" And that sort of opened the door for my entree into meeting those people and eventually becoming Muslim with them. And that was my little restaurant there. I was 21 years old. Okay. Carry on. And then, of course, Sheikh Abdul Qadir is Sufi. All of you probably know something about him. He was, for me, the person who sort of was a surgeon who just came up to me and opened the boil of pus in me, and it was a tremendous. I'll go more into him another time. Anyway, carry on. And then, of course, Sheikh Fadlallah. There's many things we can talk about that. But carry on. And then Sheikh Bashir, Uthman Bashir, great being. Many people of you know him there. Bismillah, we should say a Fatiha for him, really. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين. Carry on. Sheikh Muzaffar, mashallah, great being. Recently when I was in Turkey, I wanted to see his grave. And we knew it was in a place called Fatih area. We went from our hotel, and we didn't know where it was. And I said, drive me to the middle of Fatih, and we were driven there. And as soon as I got out of the car, literally, I opened the taxi door, and there was a man standing there in a green robe and a green turban. And I just walked right up to him, and I said, I'm looking for Sheikh Muzaffar Effendi. And he took my hand, and he took me right to his grave. It was just waiting there. Carry on. And then Sheikh Ikram, rahmatullah alayh. We can talk about him for a long time. Let's carry on. This is someone most of you will not know. This was called the Wali of the Jungle. In the early 80s, Sheikh Fadlallah had sent a group of us to Pakistan, and we had a center in Bahawalpur. And one night after a dhikr, this man walked into our dhikr. And he lived in the desert, in the jungle by himself. And every Thursday night he would come at the end of the dhikr when we were about to serve food, you know. But it wasn't that, it was much more. And he stayed almost the whole night and spoke to us and shared with us his experience. And there's more, we'll come to that later. Carry on. Now here is Sheikh Abdul Ma'bud Al-Jilani. You'll notice the date. Slightly unbelievable. 1822 to 1985. So let me stop here and tell you a little bit about him. When we were in Pakistan, I believe it was 1981 or towards 82, and we had been given a house to stay in Islamabad. And it became a habit, we were there for about 6-7 months, it became a habit of ours to go to the Jummah market, which was a lot of the Afghan refugees would come down, and they would sell their rugs and goods, and there were other things people were selling there as well. On one of these occasions, this man came up to us, and I was there with another man by the name of Abdullah Nouri. Some of you may have remembered him, Abdullah White. And this man came running up to us, and he grabbed my arm, and he said, "Are you American Sufis?" I mean, I don't know where he just said that. And I said, "Yeah, okay, we are American Sufis." He said, "You have to come with me." And he took us by the arm, and there was a car waiting. We got into the car, and he raced through the city of Islamabad till we got to a very upmarket area. And I noticed there was a long line of people waiting in front of the house, mostly women and children and ill people. And this man took us to the front of the line and brought us into a room. And in that room, there was a circle of people who were sitting around a charpai, a bed made of woven leather and wood frame. And in the middle was a little, and I'm not over-exaggerating, a little lump. I mean, about maybe like this, like that, you know. And a blanket was over it. And everyone was sitting quietly. And I was told to sit down and just be quiet. So we sat there quietly. We served tea, so on, and nothing was happening, and I couldn't understand what was going, why are we here? And the man who brought us here said, "Just wait, you'll see." Within about 45 minutes to an hour, all of a sudden this little bundle started to move, and a hand came out. It was amazing. A hand that had skin like parchment paper. And I could see the veins and almost the bone kind of there. And they pulled the blanket off, and this lovely human being by the Sheikh Abdul Ma'bud al-Jilani appeared. He was no more than about 4.5 feet maybe in measurement, and because he had shrunk because of his age, obviously. And the first thing he did is when he scanned the room, he saw me, he said, "Ta'al," he said, "come," in Arabic, he said, "come." And I came up to him, and he grabbed my face, and he said, "Anti min Irani?" And I said, "La, ana Amriki." He said, "Ah, Amriki." And then he said something to the effect, "Are you connected with the Hayris?" And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, how does this happen? And he said, I said, "Yes." And he said, "Fadlallah Hayri." And I said, "Yes." And at that moment, I mean, I bursted into tears. And then he said, "Fadlallah Hayri, Ibn Ahmed Hayri." And he starts telling me about Sheikh Fadlallah's father. And how he met him at the Jamia Masjid in Delhi in something like, the number kind of escapes me, but somewhere around 1860 something. Right? And I immediately, I mean, after that, I called Sheikh Fadlallah and I sent a message. I can't remember if we spoke directly, but he spoke to his mother, Bibi Khanum, and she confirmed that she knew a story about her husband who had been in Delhi, possibly at that time. So Sheikh Fadlallah asked me at that moment, he said, "Find out and get this man's story." Right now here, I just learned that he's 158 years old. It would take lifetimes to get this man's story. But I said, okay, I'll get his story. And so I was invited back every night, in fact, to come to see him. And the first time that I came to see him, I asked him if he could please just give me a general view of his life, a general history of his life. And he just said, "Too late," right? And I said, "Why?" And he went like this, pointed to his shoulders. He said, "My story has already been written by the angels who have been sitting on my right and my left." And I said, "Well, is there any way that I could also get your story?" And he blew me off. He didn't want to do it. So the next night, I thought it was a bit clever. So I had a little Walkman, recorder, player. So I snuck it into my kurta, and I kind of ran the microphone to my wrist. right? And I sat there on the bed with him, and I said, tell me about your life, Sheikh Mahmoud. He wouldn't speak to me. He wouldn't say anything to me. And I just don't know how he knew, but he knew that and then about 10 minutes in, he said, I'll speak to you, but turn that off, right? So I turned it off, and he told me some stories about his life. So I'll share with you one of them. How much time do I have? Am I okay? Okay. So I'll share with you one of the stories. He was with his sheikh, and I can't remember exactly his sheikh's name, but it ended in Mecca. You mentioned the sheikh's name, Sheikh Muslim, the other day, a famous Indian sheikh with the name Mecca. It may have been him, because he lived around the same time. So he was on a caravan, a camel caravan, from Syria to Hajj. This was around the late 1800s. And they were told before they left that there were marauders who were attacking the caravans that were going to Hajj, to be extra careful. So he was with his sheikh, and they were moving through the desert. Within some time, their caravan was laid siege by these marauders. And they stripped them all of any goods and gold and silver or whatever they had. And Sheikh Mahbub, who at that time was the murid of that sheikh possibly, he stood up to him, the head marauder, and said, how dare you attack a caravan that's going to Hajj? Aren't you afraid of Allah that this is such a horrible thing for you to do? The marauder was so impressed with the courage of Sheikh Mahbub that he got off of his horse, he shook his hand, he said, you're the only man in this caravan. And he honored him. He said, I'll tell you, he said, I will give you a gift. And he brought a camel laden with gold and silver and all kinds of goods. And he said, this is for you. And to the shock of everyone, including his own sheikh, he accepted the camel from the marauder. He took it. So they took off the marauders, and Sheikh Mahbub was relegated to the back of the caravan. Nobody would eat with him, nobody would pray with him, nobody would talk to him. They ostracized him. After 3 days, they walked through the desert. They came upon a caravan that had been laid siege to. Many people were wounded, and they were recuperating. It was a caravan that was from the Sultan of Turkey. It was laden with gold, and they had gold and silver to bring to pay for the feeding of the pilgrims in Mecca and in Medina. And Sheikh Mahbub took the camel and brought it back and handed it back to them. It was their goods, and he gave it to them. When he did that, his sheikh came out, he told me they were in a tent, something like that, came out, and he kissed Sheikh Mahbub's hand, and he said, from this day forward, you will be known as Sheikh Mahbub al-Jalani. And this is how he received his idhn. It was, so, this was, you look at this and you see there was no calculation here. There was no, Allahu Alam, no foreknowledge of things like this. But an inspired heart does things that you can't explain at the moment, but it's moved to do that. And this is the higher narrative that's coming through when a person is really being sincere and being that conduit of that light. And that's who he was and what he was, and his sheikh recognized it at that moment. I'm sure his sheikh recognized it before, but it was that moment that led him to openly declare that he's in that. He's in that state, yeah.
How many Hajj did you do?
I'll answer that. So one of the things he had on his wall, thank you for reminding me of that. This is an important story also about him. On his wall, by his bed, he had a document which was had a seal on it from Malik Abdulaziz, the first king of Saudi Arabia. And in it was a hijazat for him that Sheikh Mahbud can come on Hajj as a guest of the kingdom for the rest of his life. He didn't realize what he was getting into at that point. But he could come for the rest of his life to Hajj. And how he got that hijazat, and I'll tell you how many times he made Hajj in a moment. How he got that hijazat was that when the Wahhabis had made this unholy deal with the Saud family to perpetuate their perverted Islam, so to speak. One of the things that they demanded was the destruction of the tombs of the awliya Allah and the tombs of Ahlul Bayt. And anything that had to do with the family of the Prophet, to wipe it out. So they started to do this destruction of these places. Sheikh Mahbud and a group of others, in fact, Sheikh Mahbud was very close to King Abdulaziz. They were in a way companions. He was an advisor. He was there on a good capacity, but this broke it. He couldn't take this, the importance of maintaining these shrines and the places of Ahlul Bayt. So he fought against him, and he had an open rebellion against Abdulaziz and the Wahhabis. So a warrant was put out for his arrest and his immediate to be brought to Riyadh and to be beheaded in front of Abdulaziz. This is what was demanded. They finally caught him. They brought him in front of Abdulaziz, and they wrapped his head in cloth, and they had the guy there ready with the scimitar, whatever it is that they use. And they asked him, "What, do you have anything to say? Do you want to ask us to forgive you, or you'll stop?" Sheikh Mahbud recited a poem about Hazrat al-Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. A poem that Malik Abdulaziz, his mother, used to recite to him in Ashura and at other times. And when he heard that poem, he broke down into tears. And he said, "Okay, we won't cut your head off. And because you said that poem," and he went against the Wahhabi sort of desire to have this man dead, he said two things. He said, "I will stop destroying the stations of the awliya and the Prophet's family, and you will be a guest of the kingdom forever, as long as you live, going on Hajj." When I met him, he had gone on Hajj already 110 times. Subhanallah. And then to just another wonderful thing is we had a friend of ours, Jamila Kabira. I don't know if some of you may know her. She lives in England. She was there with us one day, and Sheikh Mahbud, when Hajj, he spent most of the year lying in his bed. He never came out. He just stayed in his bed. He ate there, he slept there, he saw people. People would come and ask for a taweez or a blessing or something, and he would never leave his bed. But as Hajj approaches, he would start to become active. And his wife even told me that his beard would become black. He is a phenomenon. Yeah, and he would start walking around with his cane. So we were there just around that time that he was just getting ready to go on Hajj. And when he saw Jamila Kabira, he said something to the effect to her, "Have you been on Hajj before?" And she said, "No." And he said, "Well, this year I'm going for you." Right? Yeah. And I don't know the rest of the story, what happened to her, but he said that year he would go. And he lived until 163 years old. Just two more things, and I'll end with this, and maybe later we could go to the other faces. One of the things that Sheikh Fadlallah asked me also to do with Sheikh Mahbud was, he said, bring him every day that you see him 5 gifts. And you can imagine, what do you bring a 158-year-old man? So I used to go to the bazaar and buy anything. At first I was particular, bracelets with the panjatan and little, because of religious trinkets and maybe a sweet. And I'd bring it to him. No matter what I brought Sheikh Mahmoud, and he couldn't see very well. I mean, his glasses were as thick as Coke bottles. But as soon as I'd bring him anything, he would accept it in awe and in wonder, no matter what I brought. He would take even like a plastic little tasbih or a little symbol of the Asma Jalal, and he would hold it up to his face and he'd look at it and he would say, Allahu Akbar. As though he was seeing into the universe, into everything he saw. And no matter what I brought on every single day, and after a while, after some days, he would save part of his dinner for me. So after I'd bring the 5 gifts, he would then feed me with a spoon. So it was this exchange that continued for, I think, a month or 2. I think that's time, right? Anyway, there are many more stories about him that I could share with you. But he died at the age of 163. He was taken, this picture is the only known picture of him, by the way, and this was taken from a newspaper in Germany when his murids took him to Germany to have him tested, to see about his health and why he's living so long, and just to document this phenomenal person. And when they took him there, they did a radiography of his body, and they couldn't see any bones because the calcium was so depleted that nothing to bounce off of. And they said that only happens to people that are way over 100 years old. So we knew at least that he was that. And I can tell you that I personally knew that he was much older than that, because one day I was sitting in a circle with him, and a man came to the door, fiddling with the screen door to get in. This old man with a cane, and I'm thinking, boy, this is the sheikh of old people. And the sheikh looked at him and said, "Let the old man in. Open the door for the old man." So we opened. So I got up and I opened the door for him, and he sat down. And I looked at him and I said, "How old are you?" And he said, "I'm 100, right?" And I said, "Well, how long have you known the sheikh?" He says, "All my life." I said, "He's my father, right?" So I knew he at least. And a young man was once serving us tea. And this is even more unexplainable. He was serving us tea. He was 28 years old. And I asked him, "Well, are you related to the sheikh?" And he said, "Yeah, he's my father." So I was clear now why there were so many people standing in line to see this man. But he had so many wonderful people. I asked him once how many children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. He told me he had 500 children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And one afternoon he started to name them, right? And I think he named maybe dozens before I think his wife stopped him from going on. And he had been married 7 times, and I met his 7th wife. And she told me that these were actually his children, and so on. The phenomenal being, but the main thing was, again, that the takeaway that I had from him beside all of that was when I brought him those gifts, no matter how insignificant it was, he was able to see the cosmos in them. He was able to appreciate just the simplest thing in a incredible, vast way. And that's who I think that we are. We are just this little spot, but yet, like Imam Ali said, that you think you're just this little celled thing, but in you, he said, the whole universe is contained within you. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum.